Well, hello, all you beautiful people. Snake here. Just wanted to come and chat at you a little bit about a public service announcement. I'm going to call it an adventure in public service announcements. And what I want to do is just talk about a couple of topics here, just some quick bites that you can just kind of digest and maybe think about and build on or shoot them down, however it works for you. But just wanted to kind of do my part and kind of use the podcast to reach out to our society, our country, the world, I guess, in that aspect, and just think about a couple of things that I think we all might want to consider. Some things that maybe aren't really said a lot, but I think could make a big difference. So that was the reason for the public service announcement theme, and just kind of sharing thoughts with about how we treat each other. I think that it's a undeniable point to make that part of the issue that we're having, maybe a large part of the issue even is fair to say, of the issue that we're having in this country, maybe even in the world, when it comes to social or equal rights or equality. I think every region, every country, every nation struggles with that in one way or another, and we've seen it in all the media and all of the happenings of revolution and people wanting to stand up for equal rights. And I think it would be fair to say that a lot of it stems from not just racism, but a lot of that's enveloped in power, or authority. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the disparities that we find aren't happening between different races. They're happening between the same race. There are plenty of white police officers that unfortunately shoot, white males or white females, white civilians in general. So, I think the whole law enforcement and the reform that indeed is necessary there is part of a bigger picture. And that bigger picture involves how we treat each other. And I think it's just kind of gone to shit, just to say it simply. And if we look at it for what it is, I think we can kind of start to look at the solution as well. So I'm going to start a public announcement to our automobilists. I think that on the road is a big location that a lot of conflict happens and high velocities, deadly velocities. Whereas walking by people on the street is certainly could be a dangerous situation. I don't think you're gonna get hit by a car in the same aspect. So. Or roll over in your own car. So, yeah, I do think that the what's happening on the roads needs to be addressed. The first thing that I'd want to say is, and I wanted to kind of give this to our audience here, is make sure that when you're going to your car, either in the morning when you're going to work or going somewhere in the store, coming back from work, coming back from the store, when you're approaching your car, you should have your keys with you. And I say this for a couple of reasons, because number one, if you don't do that and you get to your vehicle and then you're fumbling trying to find your keys, it makes it a frustrating experience for somebody like me that's waiting for you to move from that parking place. Because I've waited often for a couple of minutes while people are trying to fumble for their keys, and they may be carrying bags or something like that, and just didn't think about it. So it's an easy thing to do. The fact of me waiting on you is a very minor reason. Also, I think the bigger part of it is that some people are unfortunately attacked or ambushed while they're walking to their car, their house, and they're in their pockets. And from a physical defense standpoint, if one hand is in your pocket, that's not a hand that you can use. Also, if your attention isn't really on everything that's happening around you, you don't really have an awareness bubble. So you always want to have that awareness bubble. And I think that if you have your keys, as you're approaching your car already, you can kind of stay aware and also use that hand if something was to happen from a physical sense. So, and that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody attacking you, but, what if it's a kid that's running into the street and your hand wasn't free to stop them? There's a lot of different scenarios that aren't just centered around somebody attacking. But that's the first thing that I wanted to share. Super simple, but I think you'll appreciate that. Same thing when you're going into your house or your condo or your apartment or your mansion, like me. Whatever you're happening to go into, just kind of try to have your stuff ready. It makes a big difference for you in terms of your physical safety and just being efficient. So, moving right along, driving right along into the public service announcement for the drivers. The other part that I wanted to mention is obviously we would want to say people want to pay attention to driving all the time that they're driving, meaning if you're actively driving, pay attention. But I think a really important part or a really important location to be paying attention is particularly on the intersection. So, if you happen to come to a red light and you don't notice that the light has changed, that's making people behind you, take evasive moves and dangerous moves sometimes that can create an accident. It can bottleneck that intersection so that, people that are traveling behind, coming at 40 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour, don't rear end some of those people. And then it also makes it safer for the pedestrians if traffic is moving clearly that, some of the ones that are crossing the street parallel to your direction, if everyone's jammed up and everyone's trying to hurry up and get around, and it just creates a kind of a bottleneck, chaos, then I think it just makes people more prone to not see pedestrians or bicyclists or people that are in strollers. Unfortunately, we've seen that. So, at all places, when the light's red, try to pay attention to that and move with traffic. It makes a big difference with how traffic flows through the city that you may be in. So just something to think about there. Another thing I gotta say is, in a lot of states, cities, whatever, when you're coming up to a stoplight, many places you can turn right on that stoplight. So if you're not turning right and the other lanes are clear, it's a good gesture to move out of the right lane in the event that someone's coming behind you and needs to turn. It'll be an open lane for them. So, essentially, if you're coming to the stoplight and you're in the right lane, you look at your other lanes, no one's in there, you can just easily move over, and it makes a difference on how traffic can move through that right lane. So another thing I wanted to say is, obviously, we shouldn't be checking text messages while we're driving. I agree with that. If you did have to check it to check a message, why not just wait until you're at a stoplight? A lot of times people check messages while they're driving and their car's moving at a high rate of speed. And, if they just would have waited 30 seconds or a couple of minutes, they would have been pulling up at a stoplight anyway, and they could have checked it there. And, traveling at that speed, even not looking ahead for a couple of seconds, you've traveled a great distance that a lot can happen. So, I know it's a little bit contradictory to what I was saying about paying attention at the red light, because if you're checking a text message, obviously you're not going to see the red light. However, there are some methods that you can use if you're checking messages at a red light, where you can check the messages up close to the steering wheel. That way, if the light was to change, your peripheral vision will more than likely catch that cars around you are moving and that the light has changed itself as well. So there are ways to go about it, but altogether I think it's still safer than checking your text messages or trying to send a message or compose a message while you're going 50 miles per hour. So I could be wrong, but probably not. So I think, as far as, driving goes, I think those are a couple of caveats that I wanted just to share and people to consider. Overall, I think that if we really boil it down and look at driving, people are traveling at high rates of speed that are quite honestly deadly to the human body. And if we treat it that way and give each other a break, I think that it can make a big difference in terms of like highway mortality and road rage, and shit happens out there and it doesn't really need to. A lot of times these changes and these concessions that we have to make as drivers really aren't putting us behind it all and are actually making us safer. Like an example I'll give you in closing is that it's a common thing for people not to let people in that are merging in from like an on-ramp or whatever the case may be. They're trying to merge into their lane of traffic. The person that's refusing would have to either slow down or move over, and they just refuse. It's almost like they feel that by not letting the person in, they're going to get there faster or get there safer or win some type of fucking award. And I really don't understand it, but it's really not making a difference. And it's kind of a cool thing to do, to be a positive person or someone that, cooperates or collaborates with everyone, and sometimes we might be the person that needs to be let in. So I think those are really subtle changes that people can go about and make a difference about people's day and stop people from getting into so many road rage and car accident situations. So, about driving, give people a break. A lot of other things to consider that maybe we'll cover another time, but for the sake of time, we'll move into the next one. We're going to talk about law enforcement. So obviously there's a problem there, but I think another aspect that we have to consider, being not law enforcement, talking from the not law enforcement side, is that I think the ratio of incidents that we've had with officers, these bad actors, these bad cops, they are by and far small portions of what happens out there. And I know a ton of cops that, actually do stuff with their community and have made a difference and, have been there for me in terms of safety and, supporting me and my family. And it's just, there's some great guys and women out there that are doing the job and pushing that badge. And it would be unfair for us to look at what some of them have done and, kind of classify all police that way and say that we would be better off without police. I myself, personally, I believe that our society wouldn't really function the way that everybody might think it functions if we didn't have the men and women that we have protecting us and serving every day, and if something were to happen and there's no police, I'm not sure that a behavioral health specialist would be the appropriate responder. If someone had broken in my house and, had weapons or whatever the case may be. So please, understand there. I completely agree that there needs to be something done with law enforcement in terms of the culture and the reform that needs to happen there. But I fully respect and appreciate all the men and women that are not assholes, that are out there saving people's lives every damn day. So, I do think there needs to be some reform. And, kind of how I alluded to a little bit earlier about how to treat people. Fundamentally, racism is about treating people like shit. And the issue about law enforcement, that we're examining in today's society is about certain people that are treating other people like shit. I don't think it's a law enforcement wide thing, but it does happen. And I think those that are in law enforcement and aren't assholes, it's going to be your obligation to take a more active role to combating those things, because you're the closest to it and can take the most effective stance and maneuver it to curb those things. So you got to step up, guys and women. These are things that are tearing us up, as a society. And, we understand, we've got to understand some of the the types of people that you unfortunately have to deal with and are out there committing these atrocious and heinous crimes against, society members, how do we expect officers to separate that, when they're getting shot at and, dealing with child molesters and rapists and stuff like that? Sure, they're human. And, I think that while we need to raise the bar on the qualifications of law enforcement, we also need to give them more support. The ones that are not assholes and those heroes, they number one, they gotta need more pay. They got to, to have that role and not fall influence to some of the corruption or the, the traumatic shit that they got to see. They should be well more compensated than, what I do, or, what somebody else does that's not so influential or impactful, to their well-being or their mental health. So that's a big thing. I understand, especially in this atmosphere, for me to say that. But I mean, if we're going to really talk solutions, let's talk solutions. I just don't want there to be a situation where, there's nobody to call. So, we've seen, instances where, the absence of law enforcement has not produced an entirely favorable picture. So I just want us to really understand that and not have to learn that the absolutely hardest way. So, so the other thing I wanted to mention is that, for those that are out there, engaged in, criminal activity or whatever, I'm not here to judge anybody, but, I would say from a professional standpoint that at the time that law enforcement apprehends you or gets their hands on you, or is close enough to do so, I think at that point you need to admit that you're caught. So there's no, you're going to fight the police and get away. You're going to run and make it. It's just not going to happen. And, it's, if you're already at that point of being caught, it doesn't make sense to worsen the situation. I don't think anything good ever happens from those interactions or those choices that are made. I got to say that a lot of these issues that I've seen happen to our black men, and that are publicized in the media, some of the things that I've thought to myself, and I've never really talked about this, but some of the things I thought to myself is, well, shit, I would never fucking do that. Like some of the actions or the behaviors that people took, I understand that the way law enforcement works and some of the shit that those guys go through, just through my professional experiences and working with them and being in the military. So I don't think I'd ever act or react in those ways. And, I've certainly had some physical activity and what I felt was discriminatory behavior from law enforcement. But I understood at some point in my life that for me to while out and act a fool really does zero for me. As a matter of fact, I've seen it worsen the situation for a lot of the people that I grew up with, and the group, and the things that we went through, and what I saw from law enforcement happen. I've been pulled over with firearms, carrying concealed rifles, and I don't really have the same type of experiences that a lot of my peers or my black community peers have, and I feel lucky at the same time, but I just hate that there's always seems to be a behavioral aspect or a reaction that kind of pushes along the escalation and the altercation, if you will. I guess, look, I'm just going to be, cut right to it and say, look, if an officer mistook me for someone and started handcuffing me and taking me to the ground, I wouldn't fight him or her. I would allow them to take me into custody, and then I would talk my way through the situation, and we would figure it out. At that point, we would figure out if there's any, types of formal complaints or any types of litigative complaints that I needed to take. But, I'm not going to try to fight my way through law enforcement. And, I've trained, quite some time, over a decade in a few different things. But, just doesn't make any sense. And I understand it's uncomfortable, but I really feel like a lot of us these days have this certain sense of entitlement and that we can't be, challenged in some way. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit more towards the end. But just going back to law enforcement, give them a break and understand the process. It sucks, that law enforcement, does some of the things that they do, and they aren't justified in some cases by who they deal with. Maybe they're just bad apples, and we need to look at that. I get it. But as a civilian or someone that has done nothing wrong, or there's some type of mistake there, it's not good to get into a physical altercation with law enforcement and just worsen the situation. If you're doing something wrong and they've been able to make physical contact with you, then you've already lost anyway. So those are just my suggestions and my thoughts about those things that I wanted to share. And then I wanted to also talk a little bit to the officers as well. So if you're in law enforcement, going back to my stance and saying, look, we get it, some of the people that you deal with and some of the shit that you go through, being shot at, the whole nine. I understand. I've also got to say that in every situation that I've seen, where there may have been someone that was kind of acting an ass or whatever the case may be, I've seen this extraordinary use of force, and sometimes a deadly use of force, and it didn't have to go there. Do you understand? So cops, officers, brothers, sisters, you gotta stop with the power trip and that you can just do people however you have come to know that you can get away with, or just to make them pay for giving you a hard time or putting you through paperwork. It's a new day, it's a new age, and we're relying on you to remain professional. That's what you signed up to do. This isn't someone approaching you in your personal life. You signed up for this job to be a cop and put your life on the line, so you can't take it out on other people. You just can't. And for those officers that are standing by when shit like this happens, you have an obligation to do things about that, to stop the perspective of law enforcement that's fairly established. It's fair. It happens in abundance. So to think that people are going to trust or respect law enforcement when the shit keeps happening, you've got to be part of the solution. And part of that solution is intervening and de-escalating wherever you can, or formally, making complaints or internal affairs, whatever the case may be, but it's just got to stop because it's going to get a lot worse for everybody. So, I think that in a lot of these situations, are the law enforcement officers that are in these videos, I wonder what type of social training, communications training that might work there, because I just think that they're out of tools. They're out of vocalizing or verbalizing any further de-escalating or crisis techniques, so they move right to physical techniques. And some of these physical techniques, any person that feels that they're being wronged and their rights are being violated, or are just trying to stop the pain, are gonna fight you back. They're gonna fight you back. So you've got to learn some techniques that are less invasive, if you will, or less aggressive, or less combative altogether, and that people aren't going to try to fight you back on. I've seen many issues where people are being hurt, and the officers, and I don't know if they are doing it purposely or not, I really don't, but the officers continue to apply joint locks or chokeholds because the person is trying to get the pressure off of them. So, and for some of this stuff, like that type of pressure and that type of intervention and restraint is not necessary, guys and ladies. It's not. So you've got to train our people in law enforcement a little bit better on discretion, as well as what types of physical, martial arts or combat skills, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they might need to incorporate so that they can effectively control people without it turning into this brutal interaction. So that's my take about law enforcement. Just for the sake of time, we're going to move forward, but more to talk about in the future because we're far from being out of it. So we're going to tag back on to how to treat each other and racism. So we need to understand that racism is not just a white person trait. Okay, racism doesn't just exist in white people. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that racism exists in all of us. I've seen black people be racist to other black people. I've seen black people be racist to white people in places that white people aren't the majority. I've seen it. It happens commonly. I've seen, Mexicans be discriminatory towards black people because they don't like them for whatever reason. They don't like the music. They don't like them dating their women or men. There's a lot of reasons that happen there. But guys, I'm going to say that racism is a human trait and it exists in all of us. But in our evolution, we need to learn how to harness that and say, look, I understand I feel this way about these people. But I understand also that it's unethical and it's not right for me to behave in set ways that discriminate against all of those people. Whether I like them or not, what's fair is fair, and they're a human being just like I am. So that's a good start for people just to start thinking about. Give people a break. We understand that we're all going through some crazy shit, through the pandemic and through everything that's been happening in society and the protests, and it's just a crazy, crazy time. Please give people a break. It's hard for us all, and we could make this a lot better just with the power we have on our own to improve our stance about how we want to treat each other. And the worst that could happen is that I'm wrong and that you're nice to someone who remains to be an asshole to you, or that you lose some moral ground because you didn't stand up for your point or your argument. But I also could be right. So why not try it? I think that it would be a cool little experiment that you could see, even when there may not be such a great accomplishment from someone. Let's try to get into the habit of being positive outward to people as much as we can. When we see people being racist in any capacity, any race towards any race, whatever the case may be, we have to call it out. And we have to make the change because, and I don't know that anybody's really waiting on this or depending on this, but no one's going to do it for us. The government won't, and even if they were physically capable of it, they can't. They definitely can't. It's something that we have to institute as our society, as our culture, as our country. So I leave you with that. Treat each other well. Talk to each other often. I think it's a little bit extreme right now, and maybe we're in the sway of the way things kind of ebb and flow, but it's a little bit extreme right now. Give people a break. There are situations where people are just trying to talk things out and share their mind, but they're being classified as racists. So we also need to make sure we understand that as much as the media tries, it's very difficult to display the entire picture sometimes and get all perspectives. So we, as the viewers, hold the obligation to do our own independent research and arrive at our own unbiased and educated conclusions on these different matters. Okay, I know that's a complex concept, but what I'm saying is that if you only focus on certain segments of a story, your world is going to look a certain way. So it's up to us to be able to empower this technology and all of this stuff that we've got that can access information to be able to evolve. And to what I was saying earlier in the beginning of this podcast is that it's time for us to evolve. Look, we've got tools and supercomputers that, scientists would have died for 20 years ago, just to be able to further their research and have access to data. And we often squander that. And of course, I'm as I post, this video through a resource like social media, of course it can have its uses, and it does. It has its place in our evolution as a society. It also, if not handled with responsibility, can detract from that evolution. And, spending an unrealistic amount of time kind of trolling through those things is really easy to do. But there's so much more to life. And I think that might be part of the issue, or a heavy contributor as far as why people have forgotten how to treat each other well. Well, because we don't really interact with each other anymore physically. We do it through a method of communication that's very, very unclear. It's already hard enough to have a conversation with people voice to voice, but then you start talking about writing, sentences that can easily be misconstrued. Now we've got memes and GIFs that, someone's trying to make a decent point, but it gets misconstrued, or they're trying to make a undecent point. But you get what I'm saying. So those were the points that I wanted to talk to you about for my first annual podcast, and you're going to see a lot more of me. Wanted to thank everyone for tuning in and for your attention. I hope it helps. I hope it gives you some ideas and some inspiration just to kind of push the envelope here. Help people out as you can. We all need it. It's crazy times, and I think we all can find that common denominator here for us for the most part. So take care of each other. I think that the solution to the situation that we're in all exists with our day-to-day and how we decide to wield our actions and our even our words to each other. So that's all I had. I'll see you on the next podcast, but thank you everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.